Yeah. Took some time off. That's all.
As soon as,
Another sale.
Six on the dot.
yeah, I'm trying to wait till they get that technical.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me when we're ready to go? Okay.
Did I finish?
We're ready.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and call our meeting to order. If you will, Madam Clerk, would you go ahead and please call the roll of the City Council?
Thank you. The Honorable Mayor Pro Tem Hattie Portis Jones.
Present.
Honorable Linda J. Davis.
Present.
Honorable James Whitmore.
Present.
Honorable Ulysses J. Smallwood.
Present.
Honorable Pat Palin.
Present.
Honorable Alex Heath.
Present.
Mr. Mayor, you have a quorum.
Okay, at this time, we're gonna go straight into our agenda for the workshop. We have two items. We'll start with the Atlas Program Management. Mr. City Administrator, you wanna take the lead, or?
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. This is an effort to keep you informed as to our progress as it relates to our building assessment and to look at our facility update. We are fortunate to have Mr. Dana Smith as our program manager in that regard, who brings a wealth of experience. And with this, I'll turn it over to Mr. Smith to provide you with a detailed update.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Good evening.
First of all, we just want to say at Atlas that we are very honored and pleased to be working with y'all on the programming for Fairburn. We are excited about all the possibilities and opportunities, and so we don't take this partnership lightly. With that being said, I also want to just, before we dive into the outline of PowerPoint, I know we're having some technical difficulties, so ideally it would be lovely if you all would be able to see it on the screen, but if you have the packet, the slides are in the packet, and I'll be speaking from there.
Copies will be provided momentarily.
Okay. So to give a little background, Atlas came on board in July after Mayor and Council approved the task order for us to start the program management services, in particular for the building and the property management. Since that time, we've worked with staff to develop several RFPs, do some assessments of some building structures and components and systems, including some roofing, some mechanical, some HVAC, some electrical. Also working with the GMC campus here in Fairburn on some of their longstanding issues. So we've tried to assess, work with staff, develop a plan, coordinate with the city administrator to understand where we were at before, where we're at now, and give some recommendations on moving forward in the future. In the packet, the presentation will kind of provide more details to that, and I'll be speaking to that as we go along. And of course, there'll be time for questions, answers, and comments as we go through. So, again, just want to state that this is kind of just facilities overview of what we've accomplished so far in the 3 months, basically, since Atlas has been on board, the projects that are in progress right now, and then the future where we're going and what we hope to look to accomplish with the program, with the facilities as they are now and what they could be. So I know you don't have the privilege of having the packet before you right now, but some of these things you may be familiar with because we've already brought before you the RFP for the Fire Station 23 design that's been approved. As of today, we are finishing up the contract execution for that with the architect. We will be having a kickoff meeting hopefully next week, if not the week after, with the architect team, with Chief Robertson and his team, to start the initial conversations so that we can begin the design. And as we go along, of course, we'll be having conversations with planning and zoning, community development, and just continuing to develop it, and of course bring back to Mayor and Council updates about where we're at in design, how it's faring, what the building will be looking like, how close we are to being completed with the design, and so forth on a regular basis. I say regular because design is a little bit subjective in that you're trying to get the best design while combining the wants and the needs and what is physically possible in the building. I'm sure Chief probably smiled at that because we've had several preliminary conversations about wants versus needs. But we're going to try to get the city fire station that it needs for the future. We understand that this is the prototype. Along with that, there's been an RFP that's been put out for the janitorial services for the city that is under review. That review is actually going to finish up this week. So we plan to, with staff, bring a recommendation for award in the November Mayor and Council meeting for janitorial services for the city. Also, some other things that Mayor and Council may not be aware of and may not be visibly seen is we are working on and have made some improvements to the work order process for building maintenance. When I first came on board, it was a very rudimentary, basic system of just pick up the phone and calling building maintenance tech, anybody and everybody, whenever you had an issue, which is very friendly but not necessarily efficient because some of you met him and saw him today. He could be fixing something, get a phone call about fixing something else, be on the way to fix that, get another phone call, another phone call. So to date, we've implemented more of a PDF process of submitting your work order maintenance by email to himself and myself so that we can record, track, build data on the issues. And simultaneously, we are working, myself and Assistant City Administrator, working with several companies about an automated software to be able to generate work orders and to track them and to provide reports to make even more efficient than it is now. Because with one person, you can tell how that could be cumbersome to try to maintain every building in the city. Also, to this point, we've have assessed most of the buildings that staff occupies, and I say I've engaged some contractors to do some early assessments ahead of the PCA to assess the roofs, and they have brought back some preliminary reports about where the conditions of the roofs are. We've already replaced the roof at police headquarters, as you all know, but the fire station headquarters, fire station 22, fire station 21, municipal court, the utilities building, and the shop building, we had a contractor come through, do a walkthrough, assess those, and from that recommendation, that provided us with some information, and we're going to be turning that into a project, both short and long-term projects for those roofs. Because when I first came on board, leaking was a big issue in several buildings in the city, not just police headquarters. And in some buildings, it still is. So that's why there's a long-term and a short-term fix.
Could you, when you use an acronym, could you explain what that is?
Oh, I'm
So
sorry.
PCA, what's that?
I'm sorry, yeah, property condition assessment.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, my apologies. That was the RFP on the last council meeting that you all approve award to Veritas. So we'll be going into contract with them to do the property condition assessments. I have a construction background, so I get used to slinging a lot of acronyms, sorry.
And if I could, Mayor Pro Tem, that is a precursor, if you will, to the allocation that council approved in our American Rescue Plan. You may recall that we earmarked about $3.1 million to apply to refreshing city facilities. And the appropriate way to approach that is to have a complete and professional assessment of the facilities before we spend anything, so that we know exactly what the priorities are. So that's the intent of that effort.
So as you now have your packets, I'm on the accomplishments page, which should be about page 3 of your actual slides. And it will say accomplishments at the
I
top.
think it's the same,
It's the same thing we have.
that's in the book.
Okay, I didn't know, okay, sorry.
Yes, that's fine.
I didn't know if everyone had their books.
Yeah,
We
so,
appreciate that, thank you.
so yes, Mr. Phillips mentioned, along with that, I'll mention that in further detail in a minute, but that is very crucial to prioritizing projects. So far, besides the police headquarters roof that we already done, we've also made some repairs to some heating and air systems at the fire headquarters and at the GMC campus. Not to get in too much detail, but there was a variety of issues. For example, Chief Robinson had some water leaking into his office from a leaky unit that was beside his office. So we remediated, and we fixed that along with the issue at the GMC campus. And these are, HVAC repairs are ongoing. As you have aging equipment, you just need preventive maintenance, routine maintenance, and then just ongoing maintenance until the units need to be replaced. Besides that, we also have repaired a roof at the Student Center at the GMC campus in September. They had a leak in that building. It was from a minor issue with the roofing, so we had a vendor already come and take care of that. We also have done some repairs to the overhead door at Fire Station 22 and the shop. Besides that, we have done a structural assessment on the old bank. That's the property at 25 Broad Street. With that property, there's a property owner that's looking to renovate that, so we have done a structural assessment of that. That report will be being compiled and be forthcoming. And beyond that, there's just been a myriad of things we've been trying to assist staff with fixing or helping or remedies or solutions to as we move forward, including economic development with some of their ventures. So I mentioned earlier Fire Station 23. I know it's probably one of the highlight or key projects that is the concern or priority for the city. As I mentioned before, we're in contract execution, and we should look to have a kickoff meeting with that vendor within the next 2 weeks. And the kickoff meeting is really just the introduction and preliminary conversations, the first time that Chief Robinson and his team and myself will actually have a sit down with the architect one-on-one, go through some of the preliminaries of wants and needs beyond what was already in the RFP. And then for that, we'll begin our regular conversations and meetings to further hone in and develop the scope. And there'll be regular, probably site visits and updates from the architect about where we're at and what we're doing. And then we'll be able to report back to Mayor and Council what those are. Also, tomorrow, I believe we have a meeting scheduled, myself, Mr. Phillips, Ms. Chris, and Chief Robinson with the Bedford School tomorrow to give them an update on where we're at with the project now that some things are in motion and moving. Mr. Phillips and Ms. Chris thought it was a good idea to reconnect with them and to give them an update on where we're going and the timeline of how we're getting there. So on to projects in progress. I mentioned some accomplishments that we've done so far, but we still have several things currently, so to speak, in the hopper. And that includes repairs to those roofing and mechanical systems. I mentioned earlier that we did some assessments of the roofs at the municipal court and utilities and Fire Station 21 and 22. So right now, we're in the process of getting that vendor to do some of the repairs that they recommended to those roofs. From their recommendation, at a later date, we'll probably be putting out an RFP to do more roof replacements. We thought it was, at least I was prudent to do the roof assessments ahead of the rest of the assessments because of the condition of the roofs and because of the issue with water coming in to the building as bad as it was. So that's why these kind of led the charge. And envelope issues are normally very serious, and you want to make sure that you keep the outside, and you don't want mold growth or bacteria or anything like that growing, or any hazardous conditions, or any damage to property or components or equipment of the city. So that's why we did that. So there will be some money spent now for repairs, and then later on to do replacements. The goal would be to try to do a one RFP to allow one vendor to do 2 or 3 replacements that are needed. Try to get better economy to scale. Also ongoing right now is some access and entry progress. We're doing some changes with the key fob system. So there's key fob on access on City Hall, on municipal courts, and in several other buildings, but there are buildings that do not have them. So we are going through the process of finishing that on the remaining other buildings in the city that have a lot of traffic, i.e. the youth center. That's actually in progress right now. After that gets done, the vendor will then move on to a couple of other places like Duncan Park, like the stage area, to secure those doors with not just regular locks but key fobs, so that way you have a passcode entry, so to speak, with the key fob instead of just trying to have a lock. Because we've also uncovered that there are some keen issues that we were also resolving. I've already mentioned the RFP for the janitorial services. We also have finished up just recently pricing on the hose bib installation at Armando's. Right now, there's no exterior hose bib or faucet over there, so we had some vendors come out, look at that, give us a price for that. The goal is to be able to get one of those vendors to start that work before the year is out, in coordination with Armando's, of course. Besides that, we are working very tirelessly, myself, Ms. Woods, in finance and chief, on the temporary fire station. The positive news is that the temporary fire station office building is scheduled to be delivered the week of November the 9th. We have also just recently located a vendor through one of the co-op and purchase agreements that can supply the apparatus bay for the fire truck and the apparatuses, and should be in short time given approval. That is also underway. We're working on pricing with them. We also have agreements that we're working on pricing with several local vendors to do the initial gray work and earthwork needed, which is not major, it's very minor, and concrete work for the temporary apparatus bay. So the goal is to be able to set those units. After those units get set, those structures, then we'll be working to get the utilities established. We've already begun conversations, myself, Chief Robinson, with Mr. Martin and him and his vendors and with the utility owners about what we'll need to do to get utilities to the temporary fire station. But they just won't establish those utilities until you set the actual structure.
Just for clarification, and I apologize, did I hear you say you acquired this temporary station through cooperative agreement? Did I hear?
Well, the apparatus bay is we're looking to acquire that through one of those co-op or purchase agreements.
Okay, would you, and just for clarification purposes, I know we know what it is, but it's just that for people listening, exactly, just explain just shortly how that works.
Sure. So you may hear the term statewide contract or co-op or purchase agreement. Those are agreements that have been established or recognized on the state and sometimes a national level, like, for instance, Sourcewell, where those companies will bid out or solicit, I should say, contractors or vendors to provide services to nonprofit and public entities, federal entities, state entities, and local governments. They do this on a yearly, or a regular basis as needed, so that those vendors, once they go through the solicitation process, a public bid, and they are awarded, now these other public entities and nonprofits can use those contracts and utilize those contracts to procure those services without going through the RFP process, because it's already been done for you. And several of those purchases and co-op agreements are recognized by the state of Georgia as just go-to sources, and there's other ones that nationwide that are that they recognize. You may hear GSA is General Service or Government Service Administration. Sourcewell is another big one. Their Omnia Partners is another big one. There are companies that do it. Gordian, they will do these solicitations, and then they'll have a list of vendors for various services of good, whether it be furniture, contracting, office supplies, construction, that a public entity can look at that list, contact that vendor, and utilize that contract to do work, utilizing that pricing.
One of the other advantages is it takes into consideration economies of scale. So when you have these agreements where multiple cities, multiple counties, and sometimes multiple states are participating, it lowers the cost overall for everyone.
Right.
That's another significant advantage of those cooperative agreements is we typically get a better financial outcome when it is available and when it's appropriate to use for these projects.
Correct. So you try to balance the approach of doing your own public solicitation and looking at those agreements or those avenues to procure vendors. So we looked at that avenue because of the need of the temporary fire station and the size of the project and the speed of what we needed it. And we believe we found a couple of vendors that can provide us a good solution in a timely manner.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Next in the presentation is just a Campbell County Courthouse update because it's another key project that's going on right now. As of today, the insurance company has finished their fire investigation. They have given their recommendation or the theory that it was due to lightning damage and not arson or some other devious act. So preliminary structural assessment was done by the city's vendor, but at this moment, the contractor Parker Young is working to finalize their agreement and the pricing with the insurance company to do the abatement and the debris removal. Once that takes place, the debris removal and the abatement, then the structural assessment by the city's vendor will be completed. At that point, the insurance company has told us, we spoke to them even as recently as today, that they may still have their own structural engineer come and look at the property themselves, which is not uncommon. Usually insurance companies want their own vendors to do everything, no matter if you have one or not, to validate their findings, which will ultimately lead us to a point where they'll give us a recommendation on building valuation, which then we can utilize with Parker Young's pricing and their Young pricing and the structural assessment to provide some ideas, recommendations, and solutions to Mayor and Council about moving forward. I didn't know if Ms. Hill wanted to say anything else about it.
Cool. Got the thumbs up.
So, and I believe that the service agreement from Parker Young should have been sent to the, go ahead.
Yes, we have that agreement. We were waiting written validation from Travelers, our insurance company. They will cover the cost of the work for Parker Young. We received that late this afternoon, and so we'll move that agreement forward this week so that they can begin work to remove debris from the facility from the resulting fire, as well as the abatement that Mr. Smith just referenced. So that work, I think, is estimated to take about 2 weeks.
Just about two to 3 weeks, we should be.
It's not written in stone.
Yeah, it's, you know, with conditions, the appropriate conditions, we should be able to hit that in 2 to 3 weeks. We say appropriate conditions, meaning weather, most of it's on the inside, yes, but there are some components that where the asbestos was at, that's going to deal with the painting, the joints, the mold around the windows. We'll have to look at that, and I normally just recommend during these times with companies like this that do mitigation. During hurricane season, there's always the weather, so they have to shift forces accordingly. They haven't to do that because sometimes that has happened in the past.
Over
Been
and,
on that.
over and above that, what I would tell Mayor and Council is our process with this project is very deliberate. We understand that there are very strong feelings and passions around the Campbell County Courthouse, but our obligation and what we have to do is take a very due diligent process. There are a lot of variables that are still yet to be known, and so we'll take this step by step. We're going to make sure that we're very thorough. This will ultimately result in some presentation to you as decision makers once we've answered as many of those variables as possible. And there are a range of variables that we still need to ferret out. Do know that it is a priority and that we're being very proactive about moving the process forward, but there are a lot of questions yet to be answered. We want to make sure we get the best possible information for you as mayor and council so that when it's time to make a recommendation, you can do so with an informed basis.
Okay.
Absolutely. And then, I think I mentioned this already, but I'll just bring it back up again that as we go through and we find conditions, it because when they built them back then, they built them to last. And it's held up. And I say that not lightly, but myself and talking with the structural engineer that we have, doing a walkthrough ourselves, that was both of our comments, is that's why it's still standing.
Yeah.
If it wasn't built that way, it may not have made it.
Yeah.
And also thanks to the fire department for being so on top of it. So the next slide, so where we're going from here. I know I've done a lot of talking. I'll definitely leave time for more questions and comments. But where we're going from here is that right now we're working on and hope to put out within the next 2 weeks an RFP for on-call architectural engineering design services. In my estimation, humbly, that is a very critical RFP for the city, because what that will do is it will give you a list or a repertoire or a pool of architects and engineers that will be on call to provide design services, assessments as needed for the next several years in terms of the agreement of the RFP. So in the future of new builds, whether it be fire stations or fuel pumps or buildings, the city will have on-call architects to pull from to be able to just give task orders to do work, which will help expedite the timeline of doing design and construction projects. And you'll also have vendors on board that can do peer reviews of solutions brought to you or things already in place to give good evaluation of those and good remedies for those issues. That's one reason why this is so important. The next is the spatial assessment of the buildings. I kind of mentioned this with my first bullet point. That list of vendors will then use to do spatial assessments of the buildings that the city has. We know that the city is growing with staff, and we're trying to make adjustments to organize and to keep staff as happy as possible while accommodating new staff to accommodate the growth of the city. So doing assessments of the buildings is crucial because we utilize that to do reorganizations, renovations, and maybe even relocations as necessary to accommodate the growing staff of the growing city. Beyond that, we'll be working on on-call preferred maintenance and services, contractor services. For example, your mechanical, your electrical, your plumbing. There are vendors that the city is using right now to do service those units, to do some of that work, but having an on-call list also, again, puts you in a place of you about compliance because you've already done the solicitation. The pricing is already locked in to a certain extent based on the unit cost established in the RFP. Then in case of emergencies and whatnot, there's already vendors that you have a pool of that can just go and do the work with a notice of a purchase order, notice to proceed. And then they can be contracted as well to do some of the regular maintenance that some of these systems require that may exceed beyond what staff really needs to do. For example, we've done some repairs to the elevators at GMC campus twice now. That needs to be something that you have an on-call or a service agreement with an elevator company to do that.
Yeah.
It's good for them to come out and do it, but really they need to come out and do their annual, semi-annual checks. So that's just one example of how that would be a help to remedy that situation. Beyond that, we're looking at a generator for the Fire Station 22, the headquarters building / youth center building. Right now they don't have one, and as a fire station, it should have a generator. I'm sure Chief probably shook his head. It's probably per code and regulation law. We've talked about it needs to have a generator. So him and I have been working on that. We may find some solutions to get one or to work with a contractor to do so. So we're working on that project. Also, with that being a youth center, that'd be a very good place in terms of inclement weather or disasters to be able to house people if it had the proper backup systems. As well as assessing the generator and the backup power at the police headquarters, because Chief McCarthy has elaborated that it may need to be assessed a little bit further because it may not be quite adequate. So we'll be looking into that as well. Beyond that, I have been assisting economic development in some of its ventures and some of its talks with some of the property owners and some of the ideas it has for the city. So whatever way we can help with assessments of buildings, with solutions for renovations or potential new projects, we'll continue to help with that as well to help drive the catalytic converter the catalyst, I should say, of economic development. And then I mentioned this earlier, the repairs to the roof that we identified earlier are short-term. The long-term is replacing some roofing systems. Not to be too confident, but I'm pretty sure based on the preliminary assessments that we received and the future PCAs, that there's going to be recommendations to say that the roofs are in fair to poor shape. And when you see a fair or a poor shape condition on assessment from an engineer, that means, we generally mean that you need to fix it. We're just being nice about it.
Yeah.
So we'll be looking to do that probably in conjunction with the PCAs or even ahead of it when that becomes possible. And to what Mr. Phillips mentioned is after we get the PCA assessment back and that report and that data, which will be detailed enough to show us priority and severity of deficiencies, it will then give us a list to be able to turn into a priority list of projects and renovations to provide to Mayor and Council of must-dos or immediate needs versus long-term needs or renovations or repairs to certain buildings. And with that, I'll leave it to questions and answers.
And before I go to, prior to going to question and answer, I just want to make sure council understands, you see a lot of, and I'm just going to have to say it about as candid as I can, a lot of the things that you see that we're having to dive into, unfortunately, these are not things that'll get you votes at the polls. Okay, I don't know the way to say that, but what's going to happen is these are, as you guys know, haven't been in public office for a minute, these are items and fundamental things in your building, such as safety codes. I believe, if I remember correctly, one of the issues you brought up, we had a leak in a roof that was damaging evidence, I believe, in the police department. That will be something if we were to have a major litigation that required the evidence that got destroyed, that would be almost indefensible that we could sit there and explain why we allow. And so I say that because, again, a lot of the budget, I want to thank the council for the budget you approved, but a lot of the stuff that we're doing now are stuff that you'll either fix it now or you'll pay a major price later. And so I just thought that needed to be said for the public. A lot of the things you see that we're trying to do is because these are basic fundamentals that we have to address. So with that being said, do I have any member of council have a question about anything that's been presented? I'll start with Mr. Whitmore, then I'll go to Ms. Davis, and then I'll come to Mayor Pro Tem. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, sir, for your thorough presentation. I had the opportunity today to go down to utilities, and I found out something today. I had a conversation with our city administrator, and I was surprised that this particular project has not been started and completed by now, whereas the gentlemen in the street department, gentlemen and girls, in the street department during the summer months when they're out there working in those conditions, they were supposed to have a shower in a certain area there in the building so that they would be able to freshen themselves up before going home. And I found out today that that wasn't done. I thought it was done about two years ago. But if you can just add that to your list of evaluations, the city administrator and I, we had a brief discussion about it, and he wasn't aware of it either. So it's just, sometimes we just have additional information because we thought things were done based on presentations, but that's one that somehow fell through the cracks.
Councilmember, thank you for mentioning that earlier today in our conversation. I've had a couple of conversations this afternoon with staff to kind of get a better handle on what the issues have been over the last couple of years, and so we can update you a little bit further. That was new to me. I wasn't aware that that was a project previously, but we're gathering some information and can kind of give you a better update on where we are at that project.
Thank you. I know she has a nice whiteboard in her office, and she likes putting new stuff on it.
Infamous Miss Chris Whiteboard.
Full whiteboard.
Ms. Davis?
I just want to make a comment. I want to thank you and the Commissioner Phillips and Ms. Chris and all department heads for doing this assessment and understanding how important it is to be proactive about the buildings and the utilities and everything that we need to come into to do our work for the city. And to have this done by professional people that are experts in these areas. It's not a hit and miss. It's not a, patch it up and maybe a whole kind of situation. So I really appreciate your presentation here. And like Councilman Whitmore said, it is extremely thorough. And I just want to say thank you for this because this is definitely needed.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I too want to say thank you for the comprehensive report. It is truly refreshing that we have this foundation now to assess the condition of all of our buildings. Several questions that I have for you. One is, what would be the mechanism to check the status of these improvements? And if 5 years from now, we have to go back to another building. I mean, maintenance is ongoing, right? So we fix one thing today, and in 5 years, we've got to check on the status of that thing because it has a life, right? So what's our reporting mechanism to ensure that that happens? What is the institutional database that you're leaving behind so that the city, regardless of who's here, will be able to refer to today, where we are today, what has been done, what needs to be done, and the rolling priority, if you will, of the various buildings?
No, that's a great question. So the answer to that is twofold. One, the automated system I mentioned for the work orders also has asset management properties. So the idea would be for us to, in that system, notate the issues or the concerns or repairs that are going to be done or being done in these buildings. So even as a work order is completed, or we can still, that data is still captured in that system to be able to be utilized for a report. And the second reason that that's important, and the second answer to your question, is developing a preventive maintenance system. So that is a part of the preventative maintenance system where you actively check these components on a regular basis, either by staff or a combination of staff and vendors. Like I mentioned, the elevators or the overhead doors, if you have a maintenance agreement with one of the major overhead door companies in the city, the metro area, they will do semi-annual maintenance. And from their maintenance, they produce the data or recommendations or repairs needed. So they give you the information, but they also fix the problem. And then the other components like the HVAC or the mechanical, the electrical, the plumbing, that preventative maintenance system whereby staff will go by and check check the roof, check the emergency exit signs on a regular basis. That system, when it's finished being set up, because when I got here I realized it wasn't very much exist. So we're creating one along with the conjunction with the automated system that will give you the database going forward to say when things were checked or the last time it was checked or what the warranty is and when it needs to be repaired again or look for replacement.
Okay, so that will operate very much like our financial management system, if you will, right? Okay, that's fantastic. Secondly, so we do have a lot of repairs that we've got to do. So the list is long, and it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of money. But Mayor, I'm here to say that we spend this money here and we save money elsewhere, right? And I appreciate that. So given that we are now doing a lot of repairs and maintenance and new buildings, we're now in an environment where we're talking about green buildings and environmental friendly and in energy. What is the conversation being had about that? And what does the city of Fairburn need to do to position ourselves to, one, kind of be ahead of that eventual mandate that's coming, and Is that part of the recommendation that you're making to us as well?
So the short answer is yes, because as you mentioned, a lot of the nationwide standards for certain manufacturers or components like HVAC systems are enforcing or putting out new requirements or regulations for being energy efficient or green or sustainable, even more sustainable. So the newer systems that are coming out have to be able to perform at that level. And the older systems, as we repair those, we'll try to bring those up to standard, which will also may mean that some repairs may be short-term, and then some repairs may turn into a repair really recommend, instead of repair, we replace. Because there are certain older components and older systems in the buildings that we've recognized. Along with that, with the new builds, the good thing with the architect that we have on board for Fire Station 23 is very familiar with that process. I myself, Atlas, very familiar with green building. I've been doing it since 2009. I've done a couple of lead buildings in my history. And the architects we hope to bring on board with the RFP is that that'll be part of the requirements for them, is to be not just sufficient, but knowledgeable in those areas, and to design buildings in that manner. And what you'll see, to keep Fairburn abreast, is you'll see components and designs that'll have those in the design, whether they be having the building turn direction to get more sunlight, photovoltaic cells, sunshades, reclamation systems. It just depends on the project, but we'll try to implement all of those features and functions that are in the industry now, that all the other projects are doing, to bring Fairburn up to the rest of the competing, I won't say competing, with the rest of the complementary metro cities and nationwide.
Well, I really appreciate that, and thank you very much. And so I think we as a city need to elevate that we are doing that, and let's get the recognition and identify the various resources that are out there, that are available to us, because we are doing it. So let's be intentional about that, and I really appreciate that. And then my last question is, for building assessment, is the stage, have you done a review or an assessment of the stage, or is that part of the portfolio? Because there's some issues there that I've noticed that need to be repaired. And oh, by the way, at the campus, you mentioned that as well. This may not be under your purview, but Mr. Phillips, on the back side, Elder Street side, I was just noticing how mold and mildew is on the campus. So whatever that maintenance is, to make the building look fresh, because I don't think that's been attended to for a while. Okay. So regarding the stage, is that part of your assessment?
It's been a conversation. I will have to check the list of the RFP, but I don't think that'll be hard, if not, to get the vendor to do that. I've looked at that stage, and I have a couple of comments that I noted from walking it. So we'll have that conversation with Bureau Veritas.
All right, and then I'd like to say, in review of the stage, so some things I noticed when we had the festival this weekend, which was fantastic, by the way, but the acoustics around the stage, it really is right in the stage. Even being out front and in the back, the acoustics are not good or clear. And so figuring out how to address that. I noticed the performers on the stage, because of the lighting, it's excessively hot. And what do we need to do regarding the ventilation and whatever's necessary for it? So, that is our downtown amphitheater and our stage. And let's make it the best it can be for the performance. There's some new things that we can do to enhance that. And then lastly, some type of system in the back, so that when we have vendors and activities going on behind the stage, that those vendors are a part of what's going on at the front as well. So thank you. Mhm.
Thank you for those suggestions. Those are all very helpful. We had had some prior discussions that when we have large-scale activities like the Fall Festival, those are active areas behind the stage. We do want to provide the ability for folks who are engaging in those areas to still be able to hear or take part in what's going on out front. So thank you for that suggestion as well. We have looked at both lighting and sound enhancements initially. We don't have a final proposal for that yet. We certainly recognize that those are areas, growth areas in the stage, and it is a landmark feature in downtown. And so we certainly want to look to make those improvements. Performance lighting, stage lighting tends to be hot. It's kind of the nature of that lighting so that people can really see well. So we'll have to figure out how we, to your point, ventilate that and make it feasible for performers while still providing adequate lighting. And the sound enhancements, again, acoustics tend to be a function of how that area is shaped and how the sound reverberates. So we may address some of that with additional sound system enhancements. But it is a landmark feature in our downtown, and we'll certainly take your suggestions and do everything we can to incorporate those into our plan forward. And yes, we will add it to the assessments of all the other facilities in the city as well.
All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And thank you so much, Mrs. Smith, for your work.
Mr. Heath?
Yes, sir. My question is this. It seemed like every 10 to 12 years, we're coming back with these flat roofs leaking at some point in these buildings. What would be your idea of maybe placing a truss roof on top of the flat roof, and then that way you would have drainage and everything like that? I've noticed that, like homes, for example, unless there's like a hurricane or whatever, you're looking at about 18 to 20 years before you have to replace the roof. Now, and so like I say, with the flat roof, unless the drainage is properly done, and there again, animals get into those vents with the drainage and stuff like that, so water just accumulates and causes problems if the membrane starts leaking or whatever. So what would be your thought on that?
So, of course, you want to provide the roof that accommodates, that best fits the structure that you have.
Yes.
And normally larger structures, square foot wise, it's more feasible and structurally to do we say flat roof, but really that roof isn't flat. It's a slight slope to it on purpose, and it pitches to, as you mentioned, drains or to one side to drain the water out.
Right.
But I will say that some of the smaller buildings could potentially use a pitched roof, but I would recommend that the engineer look at that to see if not putting a roof on top of a roof, but replacing a roof.
Right.
Because you complicate a problem if you put a roof on top of a roof and then you won't be able to find the source of the problem. With that, to be honest, I've noticed that there's been probably lack of maintenance or care, or maybe not poor installation of some of the roofs previously. So some of the problem, or some of the remedies to the problem may just be better care and better installation of future roofs or replacements or repairs to help eliminate some of those issues.
Right.
Did that?
Like I say, it just seems like every 10 to 12 years, we're back, at square one, having to pay to have somebody come in and repair the roof or replace it. And so I was just trying to look something that would be long range, that we wouldn't necessarily have to do that.
Well, to your point, Councilman, a lot of roofs now, depending on the roofing type, give you 20, 30-year warranties. So the recommendation would be go with that where we could, in conjunction with doing the preventive maintenance that we previously talked about, which is regularly checking your roof. When I walked the police headquarters roof before it got replaced, I was walking with staff, and I'm like, I know nobody's checked this roof.
Right.
I can tell.
Right.
But going forward, like, somebody need to be up here every year or twice a year looking at this roof, and that just needs to be what the owners of property do. That's just the weight of having commercial property, that you have to invest in that.
Right.
Not like you said, like the residential homes where they just make it kind of convenient.
Yes.
You get gutter guards and you're good. With commercial properties of this size, you just have to take care of the roof.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, one other question.
Because we've got to get this next item in.
Okay.
Go ahead, but
Yes, just one question. Relative to staffing, are you having or making recommendation on the staffing level that's going to be needed, the skill set required for us to now be on a regular maintenance schedule as we need to be?
I've been fortunate that Mr. Phillips and Ms. Chris somewhat listened to me. So they, in fact, I do believe the city just put out another position for a building maintenance technician. So yes, I have had some conversations with them about that. They've asked my opinion, and I've given it to them about what that may look like.
All right, fantastic.
and Mr. Whitmore, then we'll have to cut it off right there and go to the next item. Go ahead.
Just real quick. Dr. Parks and Ms. Payne, we've had, over the past couple of years, conversations in reference to lighting, also speakers, and some discussion about possibly using the current poles that we have out there to put lighting on to shine towards the stage so that we can see the performers. Something that we did as a makeshift is we did use the fire truck lighting, but it just made so much noise. And that's why we had that conversation in the past in reference to that. Also, possibility of using our deck upstairs, and then if that wall ever gets repaired on the opposite side, having lighting coming off that. So there's a couple of ideas there. Then also for the PA system, I know that the system that we initially purchased is not conducive to what we're going to be doing. So in the future, that's something that we can probably put in the budget, and then we wouldn't be paying as much. We just pay for a sound engineer to come out and do his thing, his or her thing.
What I would tell you very briefly is, much as we've done with all city facilities, and you heard this evening, for the stage, what we will likely do is bring in a vendor that specializes in sound and lighting to do an assessment and to design a system for that entire area because of its importance to the city. We need a systematic design for that area that considers light, sound, and provides the optimal outcome. We'll have to figure out how we fund that, but we'll start with a expert assessment and then a design of something that works in that space.
Okay, we have to go to the next item, and unfortunately, we won't be able to spend the kind of time we wanted. But go ahead.
Well, Mayor, what I would, as we get ready to briefly touch on the next item, there is not adequate time for us to have a robust discussion on this issue.
Okay.
It is about developing a reserve and fund balance policy, which we are currently working on to bring forward to Mayor and Council, ultimately for your approval. The intent this afternoon was just to present the framework, which you have in your agenda packets. As you know, when we began work on this, we had our previous finance director in place. We're now working to fill that position and have interviews scheduled actually this week. And so we're moving that forward. This won't make it to your actual agenda until we have a new finance director on board, because that person needs to be key in helping to shape this policy. This is intended, as I said, to give you an initial framework for what reserve and fund balance policy should be based on or should look like. Ms. Chris is going to hit some very brief highlights of that policy. And again, with respect to time, as we're nearing the end of our work session, she's just going to touch on it very briefly. It will come back for a more robust discussion and, of course, questions and input from council.
Should we add this to the agenda? Can we add it to our,
No, because I think.
For discussion?
Did you want to add? I thought you had the information you had.
A work in progress. And
Yeah.
so-
no, just for discussion, so that you have adequate time to do your full presentation?
We can do so at the will of the council, whatever.
Okay, I can go ahead and add it, but in this case, in terms of going into great detail about it, because it's a working process, I'd rather not have a lengthy discussion about it, because you're gonna ask questions that we've yet to get answers for, that we're in the process of getting answers for. That's what I'm concerned about. Actually, in all candor, I'd rather not add this item to the agenda because of information I know for a fact that we're trying to find out financially. That I'm a firm believer when I bring information to the council, we all almost but forecast questions that I know you would want answers to. I would demand if I was listening to you, and that's why, in all candor, I'd rather not add this item today, because I'd rather us have when we present it, in this case, do just what we did just then, have adequate time to ask every kind of question you could think of. Unfortunately, this is a little too important. The reason why I think it's important when we bring this item back, it's important, based on kind of a report you're gonna get later about local option sales tax. This is gonna directly impact what we're talking about doing as it relates to whether we have a reserve account or, you know, and so that's gonna play a major role. You'll understand after you hear his report tonight, trust me. So if you don't mind, I'd rather, if members of council don't mind, I'd rather hold this item until we come back.
I'm in agreement.
Yeah. In all candor.
If that is the will of the council, Mayor, I would ask for one small indulgence with the 3 or 4 minutes that we have
Go ahead.
in the work session. We have a video presentation from the Fairburn Festival
Yeah, go ahead.
that we'd like to provide for mayor and council, and as well as our citizens who may be watching. I think it's about 3 or 4 minutes long.
Go ahead.
Oh, it's not quite that long.
When I saw it, went.
With that said, just to give those who may not have had a chance an opportunity to see things that took place at our wonderful Fairburn Fall Festival. More to come on that. That's just a quick preview.
Culture. We've got a couple of minutes later, then we'll start. We'll start in about 3 minutes. They caught you.